Hi, my name is Michelle Fishburne, otherwise known as the Happy Nomad or that crazy lady who drove 12,000 miles all over the United States in her motorhome during the pandemic so that she could interview hundreds of people about their lives during the pandemic and what they were like. And so Boulder Bookstore has asked me to come and talk to you all about what it was like out there in that journey and to talk to you about what ended up happening, which was a book. And the book is called Who We Are Now, Stories of What Americans Lost and Found During the COVID-19 Pandemic. It's published by UNC Press and the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke. And I wanted to thank Boulder Bookstore for asking me to come on and share with you a little bit about how this book came to be and to read one of the stories in here. It's actually a story by Chris Belair, who is a monologue writer for the Jimmy Fallon Tonight Show. So we'll get to that in a bit. And so I am here in my motorhome. I travel by myself and I have to ask my own questions. So Boulder Bookstore has given me some questions to respond to. So here's the first one. What inspired you to begin the journey that led to this book? Well, that is kind of an interesting story because in the beginning of 2020, my life was normal. And then during the 2020 COVID spring, I got laid off from my job with a nonprofit because I was doing national events and those couldn't happen during the pandemic. And I thought, no problem, I'll get another job. Well, I submitted 86 customized cover letters. And for months and months, I tried to find a job and nobody would take me. I offered myself for free and nobody would take me. That's true, actually, it really is. And so at the end of July of 2020, I had to figure out what to do with the lease that was coming up in my post-divorce house. And my youngest was going off to college, so I was going to be an empty nester. And I thought, well, if I can't find a job, how on earth am I going to figure out where I'm going to get an apartment or a house? And so I moved into my 2006 motorhome with my dog Buddy, very aptly named, and my youngest went off to college. So on August 1st, I had no house, no spouse, no job, and no kid to take care of. So I thought, well, what am I going to do in this motorhome? How am I going to spend my time? I had road schooled my kids during my homeschooling years with them, and so I knew how to get out and about in the country with the motorhome, but what was I going to do? I thought about taking the motorhome to the beach and just hang out and have a nice time and try to get a job every day by trying to consult or submit more, letters begging people to hire me. And I thought that sounds really scary. But what doesn't sound scary is like that run, Forrest, run thing. I thought, well, I'll just go ahead and get in the driver's seat and start driving. But I needed a project. And I was super curious about how others were doing during the pandemic. And don't you remember how you were super curious during lockdown too? How we all watched the people in Spain and Italy go to their balconies and hit pots and pans and sing. We all just wanted to know how each other were doing. Well, that's how I was too. And so I thought, well, I'll just get in the motorhome and I'll drive all over America and I'll ask people how they're doing. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Brandon Stanton's Humans of New York, but I thought I'll do that. I'll take their photos. I'll interview them, get their transcripts. It'll be just like Humans of New York, except it will be Americans of the pandemic. And so in September 2020, I took off and I headed west and I started interviewing people. And I never expected this to be a book. It was just supposed to be a project to keep me busy and to show people that I had value, that I could do something. Well, people said, it's a book. And so I thought, all right, I'll send one email to UNC Press and see if it's a book, because that's where I'd raised my kids in Chapel Hill, and I graduated from UNC Chapel Hill. And they came back and they said, you're darn right, it's a book. And so here we are. It's a book. That's what inspired me to put this book together. So next question, and I hope you don't mind, I'm going to put on my glasses. When you interviewed people, did you go with a stock set of questions or was every interview different? In the beginning, I had to figure out what questions I was going to ask, but then I stumbled on a great question. And so that was the question that I would ask everybody after that. And this is the question. It's January 1st, 2020. What was your 2020 supposed to be like? And what did it end up being like through to the present? And the magic of that question is, I would tell people, I'm not going to ask you a follow-up question. You can just go. And they looked at me kind of odd, and I said, a lot of people just go for 20, 30 minutes, and then they breathe. And that's really how it went for most people. In fact, I interviewed Jim Purdue of Purdue Farms, and he said at the end of his answer, he said, how long was my answer? And I said, 18 minutes. And he said, that is the longest answer I've given in my whole life. People just really wanted to share what was going on in their lives. And so that was the question. Number 3, how did you decide who to talk to? And how'd you get them to meet with you face-to-face during the pandemic? Well, that was really hard. In the beginning, I crashed and burned. As I started heading west, I didn't know how I was going to meet people. And I went up to people in campgrounds and asked them if I could interview them. They looked at me like I was a nut. And so what I decided to do is start to reaching out to organizations like museums and local radio programs, local editors, organizations to see if they would meet with me. And I did that for a little while. But then what ended up happening was I was in Pine Bluffs, Wyoming, and I was meeting with the Parks and Rec people about the kite festival they had in that fall. And they really thought it was kind of odd that I was interested in a kite festival, and I was all the way from the East Coast. And why was it a big deal? And I said, you have no idea how much the people on the East Coast would love to have a kite festival, but they can't. So that's why I'm here. But so what ended up happening was the woman said, oh, you need to meet so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And that's when I realized you find a smaller town, you find a connector in that town, and then they introduce you to a lot of people. And so that's how I met most of the people on the road. And then I also knew there were certain professions and parts of the country I wanted to hit that I wasn't going to get to. And so I would put out on Facebook or to friends, hey, do you know somebody who has maybe one of these professions someplace in the country or a particular state? And so some of them were done by Zoom. Next question. Did you find some common themes in the stories you heard from people? Yes. When I went out there, I thought people were going to be despondent. I thought they were going to be sad, troubled, concerned. And of course, that is true that people were very concerned. But the common theme I found that really surprised me was pluck. And pluck is a word we don't use very much anymore. It means spirited and determined courage. And that's what I found. With the restaurant owners who were trying to hang on, with the teachers who were trying to figure out how to teach the students, with parents who were trying to hang on, and with people who lost loved ones. And it just seems like that makes a lot of sense as people. I mean, if we were to think back thousands of years, cave people in a cave, they get attacked by a saber-toothed tiger, they lose some of their clan members. You still have to get up the next day and take care of the kids and find food and water and shelter yourself and you in a safe place, and you move on. That's spirited and determined courage, and that's what I found. What was it like to be traveling around the country during the early days of the pandemic? Strange. Very, very strange. There's a photo of me in the beginning of the book standing on the bridge between Cincinnati, downtown Cincinnati, and Kentucky. And I basically stood on that bridge for 5 minutes trying to get a good selfie. It still's not a good selfie, but whatever. And I think maybe 2 cars passed me in those 5 minutes, and it was rush hour. And so it was a very odd time. And I also went into early on the West Virginia Tourist Center. You know how they have all those brochures and everything when you go in. I thought, oh, I'm kind of curious, maybe a town I should go go to. And there were no brochures. All of them were down. I went up to the person, I said, why no brochures? And she said, well, people might touch them and give each other COVID. So it was an odd time. And people started telling me as I was traveling, they said, "Oh, you're trying to do a John Steinbeck Travels with Charlie." I had never heard of Travels with Charlie. I love Steinbeck, but I did not know a lot of his works. And, the really big difference is when he went out, there were restaurants and bars and community festivals and people hanging out on the front steps of a general store. Yeah, that wasn't happening when I went up. The streets were rolled up, and so it really was challenging. What are a couple of books you read during the pandemic that you really loved? Well, so as soon as I started doing this project, like I said, people started telling me about Travels with Charlie, and I was doing Travels with Buddy, my Shih Tzu, who was accompanying me on the journey. And so I read I listened to the audiobook of his book. And but I have to tell you, it was really hard to listen to an audiobook and to drive because I really love seeing what's around me. So I had to end up taking it off of the audiobook function and reading it. But that was a fabulous book. And of course, people were starting to say, "Oh, your work is like Studs Terkel's Working." So I read a lot of Studs Terkel's book, Working. And then people also referenced Gig, another book of the same genre. And so I read that too, in bits and pieces. But to be truthful, my days were packed. I was getting up at 6 a.m. in the morning and going to bed around midnight or 1. And I was driving almost every day, and I was trying to find the next place to go and the next person to interview. And then I was taking the transcripts. I use a transcription app called Otter, Otter, on my phone. And then after the interview was done, I'd send that to myself and look at all the words and figure out the arc and then move things around a little bit, send it back to the person and say, "Is this what you said?" And they said yes. And then I would post it to my website, whowearenow.us. So they were very, very, very busy days. And I still continued to try to look for a job during the tail end of my trip. And my trip was September 2020 to September 2021. Okay, is there anything else you want us to know about your book? I was so excited to go around and meet all these people. And I am equally excited to find out what stories really resonate with you guys. And I'm really excited to start hearing back from people. You can go to my website, whowearenow.us, and send me an email, or you can go to social media, Who We Are Now USA, or Michelle Fishburne on Instagram. But I really want to hear what stories resonate with you guys and why. The whole point of this is to have captured these for posterity and to also share them out so that we can all process what we went through. And it's kind of like a time capsule. And for me, what I'm hoping is that you all feel like you were riding shotgun and meeting these people with me along the way. Last question. Can you please read us a short passage from the book? And I'm about to read to you, as I promised, Chris Bellaire's story. Okay. He is a monologue writer for The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Jimmy's last in-studio show was Thursday, March 12th, without an audience. That weekend, Jimmy told us he was going to do the show from home. "I'm going to work from home like everyone else," he said. And we're all like, "Awesome, yes, we're doing this." Then in the next breath, it was like, "How are we going to do this?" But all credit to Jimmy. He set up a tripod, made a TV show, and basically shot from his house. And it kind of took off from there. As a writer for the show, the first thing I had to figure out was, where do I even work from home? I had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old in a small New York City apartment in Queens. There's not a lot of space, so I've been working in bed. I've been in bed ever since. I joke that it's like the grandparents in Willy Wonka. I'm sitting upright with my legs out and I'm typing away to the sounds of the chaos going on in the next room. My days have been basically working during the day and trying to keep 2 toddlers entertained throughout the week. We tried all sorts of things, from pool parties in the bathtub to obstacle courses around the apartment. It's fun until our downstairs neighbor left a nice passive-aggressive gift of 2 kids' padded slippers on our doorstep, which was kind of a nice way of saying, keep your kids quiet. Like, do you understand these are 2 toddlers in New York, so there's no keeping them quiet? One of the things that was great about Jimmy's at-home shows was watching him interacting with his daughters. It was just real, and everyone could relate to the chaos of working at home, with kids jumping over your back and talking to you while you're trying to work. A huge challenge of working from home has been that I miss the camaraderie of the writer's room, where there was always someone you could turn to and ask, is this funny? Can you help me? Is there a rewrite there? Here? Yes, you can bounce ideas off of fellow writers in the Zoom box, but everyone's on mute. Pitching jokes out to the silence is really uncomfortable. It's probably something like what Jimmy was experiencing. You'd write material for Jimmy. He'd sit down and tell jokes to a tripod. Even though you knew there wouldn't be any laughter, there was always a heart-sinking feeling every time there was just dead silence after a joke. Maybe his wife Nancy would chuckle, or maybe the kids wouldn't laugh, and that made it funnier. But seeing those jokes die to silence every night was hard. You just had to tell yourself, maybe someone at home found that funny. We wanted to make people laugh and give them something to look forward to at the end of the night. People were having a hard time, and they wanted a show that was an escape from what was going on. As a writer, that posed some difficulties. How can you escape from the pandemic when everything going on in the news was about the pandemic? So you felt like while you wanted it to be an escape, you also had to talk about what everyone was going through. And I think that's where our team sort of geared towards. What was on everyone's mind at the moment? Whether it was panic buying of hand sanitizer, mass wiping down of groceries, people working over Zoom, we were writing for an entire new world. Another challenge was writing our weekly bit that we call thank you notes. They've always been my favorite part of the show to write for because you can write about anything. And that broadness is what is exciting, especially for me, who writes about the news every day. Observational humor is fun and different. Usually you find inspiration for it when you're just out and about, living your life, taking the train, walking by people. But how do you find inspiration when you are working from home, especially working in bed? When you're just looking around your room for the 100th day? Thank you, blinds. Thank you, ceiling fan. You just kind of lose all that sense of the outside world in a weird way. It's an exciting time now for the show to be in front of a full audience again. When Jimmy walks out there and he says, I can feel the love. You really, really can feel the love of the audience. He's just so pumped. It's exciting to see him read your material and hear the audience laugh. Finally, I interviewed Chris in New York in June 2021. And I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks again, Boulder Bookstore, and thanks to UNC Press and the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke.